And public service is about empowering people to do things that, in a way, coming together in a sense of a community to do things that they never imagined that they could do. And there's a certain magic that takes place with the right leadership that enables people to do that, so that things that can get done much faster than they thought that they could, and in ways so much more creative when you include people in the process. I understand from having served as Secretary of State that we have in the United States a very special form of democracy, and it is one worth fighting for on the battlefield and in the committees of the U.S. Senate. You see, Ohio is a microcosm of the country, and that is what makes us such a controversial battlefield for the rest of the country. That's why it's looked at as the prize in presidential elections. But that microcosm allows us to see some of the problems that the country's facing even sooner than what the rest of the country does. In 2006, we were talking about the economy while the rest of the country was still talking about the war. Not that the war wasn't important to us, but we were sensing it, we were feeling it sooner than others. I know Ohio, I cherish its people. In the 27 years I've spent working in and out of government, I have traveled all over the state, and I love to meet with them directly, because each time you meet with the person, wherever they are in the state, you learn more about our great state. As you make up your minds, I ask you to remember that a U.S. Senator must exercise courage, must be willing to fight hard for the people of the state, but also must have the experience to know how complex policy translates through the various levels of government to affect the everyday person. So if you believe that policy should be crafted from the ground up instead of from the top down, I'm going to go ahead and take all the 5 minutes there, thanks. If you believe that policy should be crafted from the bottom up rather than from the top down, as it's been done for so many years to the devastating detriment of people in the state and around the country, then I believe that you will support me. The differences that you'll find between my opponent and me are less issue-oriented and more based on core issues of trust. Ohio voters can trust me to fight hard for them. I've demonstrated it as Secretary of State when I withstood partisan lawsuits and attacks from sectors that wanted simply to undermine the ability of people to participate and have their right to vote. I worked hard to take care of the boards of elections if it meant removing members, which you know up here, some of that happened on both sides, Democrat and Republican, or if it meant surveying the voting machines, studying them, understanding the pitfalls, and creating security procedures to protect voters, or if it meant training poll workers, training elections officials, and in the end, we had no long lines. I fought for a fair election, and we got a fair election, and what the rest of the country could see as far as a fair election was that Ohio had a boring election, and that was a very good thing. Now, I have a record of action, and especially you've seen it here in Cuyahoga County. I've shown decisiveness, and I will continue to be unafraid to take principled stands on controversial issues. While others may hold their finger to the wind, I will be moving forward and taking action and getting things done. My campaign is no different. I remain undaunted because I know that if I win, it's not just about me winning or my supporters getting the nominee that they want and eventually the senator that they want. This campaign allows us to change the Democratic paradigm. You see, there are so many new people who have become involved in politics, and they will eventually be running for state or local office. And in that case, we want to make sure that they can run on their values and that they can do so in such a way that they can ensure that their passion for changing communities is actually fulfilled. Money and endorsements should not be controlling campaigns or governance. And I want to open doors for a new generation of leaders who will be able to campaign and govern consistent with their values. This is what differentiates me from my opponent. Thank you.
All right, very brief rebuttal here from Mr. Fisher. 20 seconds, one good soundbite.
My wife, Peggy, tells me that I talk too long. I'm therefore relinquishing the 20 seconds. I got plenty of other things I can say later. I don't need to do it.
And I'll give up my 10.
All right, well, no closing thoughts, no rebuttal. All right, now we're going to put our panelists to work, Reggie Fields and Karen Kassler. Karen, your first question for Mr. Fisher.
Mr. Fisher, you were the head of the Department of Development when the nation and Ohio went through this terrible recession described as the worst since the Depression, lost hundreds of thousands of jobs in Ohio. I'm wondering, in hindsight, what could you or should you have done to help stop that job loss? You resigned as the head of the Department of Development when you chose to run for this office. What could you or should you have done, and should you have resigned?
Well, Karen, I'm very proud of the work that Governor Strickland and I have done over the last 3 years on the ground, saving and creating jobs, and I'm continuing to do that work. The governor and I went to Detroit not long ago to meet with the executives of GM, and that had a lot to do with the addition of a third shift at GM Lordstown and bringing the Mustang engine right here to Ford Brook Park. But I also, as I said in my opening remarks, Karen, believe that there are some things that are simply beyond the control of a governor and a lieutenant governor in any state, regardless of their party. When you have federal policies that are undermining what you're doing on the state level, you've got an obligation, I think, and a responsibility to try to change those policies. By giving tax breaks to companies that outsource their jobs to China and India to Mexico, by not giving exactly the opposite, a federal job creation tax credit to a company to create a job right here in Cleveland or in Northeast Ohio, that's wrong. I also don't like the fact that we are bailing out banks but shortchanging small businesses. We need to take $30 billion, Karen, of the TARP money that's been paid back to the federal government and use it as a community loan pool through community banks for small businesses that have never missed a payment. Bottom line is that I'm proud of the work we've done, I'm proud of the work we continue to do, but until we change federal policies that got us into this economic recession, we're not going to be able to really chart a new path for Ohio.
All right, Reggie, a question from Ms. Brunner.
Sure, Ms. Brunner. You just commented that money and endorsements should not control campaigns. Obviously, your fundraising efforts in this campaign have been well documented, the struggles that you have had. But over the past month or so, you have accused your opponent or his campaign several times of relying on its relationship and support from Governor Ted Strickland to potentially or essentially intimidate donors not to be giving to your particular campaign. On one hand, it seems like candidates in your position would encourage people to give to you and not the other, but you seem to be making a far more serious accusation here. I was wondering if you might be able to cite examples and expound on that.
Thank you, Reggie. I'm really glad you asked me that question. I'm not here to accuse Lieutenant Governor Fisher of particular instances because he keeps saying that I have to have evidence to back up. Although the evidence is there are a lot of people who don't feel comfortable stepping forward. The bigger issue is that I've made the pledge and I've stuck to the pledge that I will not take money from banks that received TARP money, the Troubled Assets Relief Program money, bailout funds. And it's a real problem if someone goes to the Senate where we have some monumental challenges ahead of us, such as further work on health care, banking reform, immigration reform, and those who have taken money from people that they've given money to. For instance, there's likely to be a clamor and a cry again, and I know Governor Strickland himself has said that we're likely to need more money from the stimulus. You can't take money from people that you're giving money to, because no matter how upstanding you think that you are, it causes you to pause, it clouds your judgment, and people have a perception that when there is sometimes inevitable slowdown in the process, that's the basis for it. I know this. I inherited an election system from Ken Blackwell, who took stands on issues he shouldn't have as Secretary of State, who headed up the Bush re-election campaign, and when there were problems, people perceived that there was something wrong with the system, and democracy is fragile. People have to trust it to be able to use it and participate and for it to be healthy. The same goes for members of Congress in the U.S. Senate.
All right, Karen, your question from Ms. Brunner.